I am on a quest. I want to find out how to make software and hardware perform at their peak. I want to know how to make applications faster and more efficient. And while I'm at it, I want to have a little fun. Don't think I can do it? Just watch me. I'm Scott Moore, and this is the Performance Tour.
Hey everybody, this is Scott Moore, and I bet you're wondering why I'm in the Stones River National Battlefield in front of this big cannon right here. Because we're about to fire up another episode of the Performance Tour. Today, we're going to be discussing performance in DevOps, but in a business context. We're going to be talking to Mav Turner of Tricentis, the CTO over their DevOps business unit, to find out how we as performance engineers get to the big boys table and talk about how we make performance a priority in a business and why we should be the superstars that CEOs want to take their selfie with. Before we get into the interview, let's not forget about the Performance Tour live events that we have. Last episode, we talked about our Atlanta trip, but we recently finished one in Austin, Texas, and we had a really good turnout. I was there with my friends from QA Consultants and James Pulley. We had a great presentation and great feedback from the audience that was there. Although I love the video, it really doesn't do it justice until you are there live at one of our events. So I hope that you'll join us from some of our other ones that are coming up later this year. Let's sit down with Mav Turner and talk about DevOps and performance now. Thank you for being on the show today, Mav.
Thanks, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
So tell me about you and what you do here at Tricentis.
Sure. So I am the CTO of our DevOps business unit. And basically my job is to make sure that as we build products for teams that are practicing DevOps, teams that are trying to do that transformation, that our tools are enabling those teams and their processes, right? So there's not a DevOps product, if you will, but it really represents how we think about the shift in the industry and how we think about the different teams going through these transformations. How do we enable them? How do we ensure that our tooling is part of that process and eases that process and that transformation instead of hindering it.
Right, okay, so let's just go right into that. How do you, over these products in Tricentis, how do you keep these products at pace with these? These are not just process changes, these are culture changes that we're seeing. So how do you keep pace with that? How do you keep them relevant as we see this shift happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you called that out, the culture change, because that's what drives everything else. And the way that I can recommend to any of your listeners, your watchers, and the way that we do it is the team building these products is practicing what they preach, as it were. And look, we have the advantage that we're building products for the practitioner. So my team actually uses the product every day. And they're using it and they're depending on it. And so they have to ensure that it fits that process, but also, like you said, the culture change. So when I talk about, how do we get continuous improvement? How are we constantly getting better? How are we shifting left, whether that's performance testing or functional testing or security testing? I'm expecting my team to do this and to use our tools and therefore to feel the pain of the customer. So the short version of that is the developer, the tester, the engineering team on here is the user. Right. And so that creates this really great little cycle for us where they have to, make things better, otherwise they're feeling that same pain. The other thing I'll say is not only are they using it for our internal processes and to make our products better, we actually do rotations regularly with a support rotation. So they're talking to, they're not only using internally, but external customers and users and kind of meeting them where they're at. Everybody's on a different place in their journey. Everybody wants to get better. That's the culture change, right? That continuous improvement. No matter where you're at, you shouldn't feel bad. But how are you getting better? And so that's how we do it. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's what works for us.
So you just mentioned the words continuous testing. in your last statement, and that's where I want to go next, which is about continuous performance. And this is something I'm hearing more and more about amongst my peers. Everybody wants it, everybody says they need to be doing it, but it's much easier to say than it actually is to execute, at least today. It can be pretty hard. So what are your thoughts around that? How do we make continuous performance part of this continuous testing effort and make it easier for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is very hard to actually, and again, it goes back to your culture point as much as anything, right? Having the resources, the knowledge, the training. When I work with teams that don't have a performance background or don't have a dedicated performance engineer, and they start to have issues or seeing high load times, bad user experience, and they say, how do we improve that? Oh, we'll run a performance test. Well, you're changing so much every release, no matter how frequently you're releasing. If you're releasing multiple times a day, you're releasing once a month, twice a year, whatever that cadence is, it's not enough to just do that after the fact because of the changes underneath it. But most teams don't know how to find that tooling. They struggle with that culture shift. And so what I've seen a lot of people be successful with, whether they're our customers or whether internally, is making that business case for why it's important and how we can actually have a drive revenue, drive business growth. Why are we seeing lost sales if you got more of an e-com kind of web platform? Those are the easy scenarios to look at and say, oh, we saw higher cart abandon because the performance load time. Like those scenarios are much easier to quantify the business impact and the dollar value of performance testing. The other thing, though, that I've seen more recently as we've seen a lot of customers move to cloud is the cost impact. So it depends if you're trying to focus on the top line or the bottom line and what your business is looking at right now. But if you look at that bottom line impact, the more that usage gets out of control and the longer you take to resolve it, the higher your cloud bill is going to be, is the simplest way I can say it, right? Because you don't understand how the services you're using, the new code you deployed is driving up your COGS, and performance can actually be a really insightful way to look at the COGS impact of your service and your product over time. And so that's something that I think can then help drive that cultural shift about why that's so important.
Well, you mentioned the cultural part of it, but there's also the technical execution of continuous performance. And I kind of feel like we've got a little bit of a skill shortage out there, especially from the traditional performance tester, load tester, and even engineers. They're going to have to reskill to some of this. Like they're going to have to use Git. They're going to have to learn how to use some things they may not be comfortable with today. Do you feel like we've got sort of a skills resource issue today?
Absolutely.
And that's why it's not happening?
Yeah, there's two sides of that actually. So there's the kind of, I'll use the word legacy kind of performance engineer skill set that needs to retool and use modern frameworks and technology. But also the reason that dedicated performance engineer role is so important is because it is a discipline in of itself. And so if I go to kind of a team where I've got my front end and my back end team, developers, got a couple of testers in there, and I say, now you got to do performance testing, they're going to say, oh, I think I can figure something out, and they'll start on that journey. But they really need to be more enabled with kind of those best practices that have been around for a while, but they may not be as familiar with. And so I think that performance engineering role, that performance engineer architect, that person who can really help that team and enable that team be productive and own that is super critical. I just don't see that enough in most organizations. So I see people and teams struggling with the problem, but very few organizations that have enough of that skill set, particularly with that full modern stack you just mentioned. So it's kind of a multifactorial problem there.
It seems to me like it's fundamentally educational based, because most kids coming out of college today have learned some background in programming. They've learned JavaScript, they've learned C++ or whatever that is, but they don't really teach you how to create performant code from the get-go, or secure code for that matter. So they're not thinking of that, but I think fundamentally we're just not teaching anybody. You learn as you go, as you get bit on something, and it's this old wow moment, I've got to know how to do this, and let's make sure we don't do this again in the future, right?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back in my career, the times when this became important to me was all of a sudden I have new release and then customers complaining to me that the latest version is a lot slower and they have a lot of issues, and then I go to my engineering leader and say, hey, what happened in this release, and did we do our load testing and performance testing? And like, well, we do it every other release, or we didn't test this one. And so like that's when it, this is about probably over a decade ago that started biting me, which made it a priority to say, like, we have to do better here because we're really putting customers in a bad spot if we're not bringing it in. And back to your point, if you look at the curriculum, whether that's a traditional 4-year school or some of the certificate programs or self-taught, you just don't see as much education material about how to think about this. Now, the funny thing is, you'll see this extreme about optimization and code on very small scenarios, and like, go to use C to try to make this super performant and scalable service and function, but that's usually a very niche and limited thing that you learn when you go through school, right? How to you learn your different notation for like how long this algorithm is going to run, and we do spend a lot of time on the academic side of that. But then when you get into production, you look at like what you're actually that environment, the real world, is actually going to operate in. I don't think we're equipping people to be successful there. And you mentioned security. There's been a ton of information on how to and education and marketing, but I actually don't think we're significantly better at building secure code today than we were 5, 10, 20 years ago. We're a little better. There's more resources.
But not according to the headlines.
Right, yeah.
Not according to my LinkedIn feed.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you keep triggering ideas in my head for new questions, because you just mentioned about a performance engineering team being specialized, and that you mentioned niche skill sets, which is what I'm always talking about with performance engineers. I believe it's a niche skill set. Do you believe in the world of DevOps that site reliability engineers will ever replace performance engineers? Why or why not?
So the short answer is no, I don't think they will. I think SREs are defined differently in different organizations. I talked to one company and how they use SREs is very different than another, and how we use them is different than a lot of other companies. So first I'll say is, while there are standard definitions, when in practice I don't see a lot of standardizations. The other thing is, I do think the value of an SRE on the team is generally more in that kind of jack of all trades. So yes, they can go attack a nasty hard problem and help you solve it, but ultimately, because they will not have seen that same type of issue in different environments and different teams and different stacks and languages, whatever the specific scenario is, they're not going to have as many tricks up their sleeves, as it were. So you typically get these SREs that can make things run, and they can make sure that they can be super reactive, right? Things are on fire, they can get in there and they're kind of move fast, put those fires out. But when you get to that long-term strategy, I think you're starting to kind of lose some of the knowledge and skill set of some of these more specialized functions. Again, it's the same reason why we have front-end and back-end developers, and not all teams have that. Some teams you have full stack developers, and you just have to look at your business and the product or the teams or the service that you're trying to build and maintain, and figure out what the right mix is for you. Where can you staff? Where can you burst to? Are you using contractors? All those things go into the consideration about who can do what. But assuming that it's important that your application is up no matter what the load is, that's where bringing in the specialized performance engineers on the design side, on the architecture side, that's where they can help you kind of plan for that growth versus, oh no, we've had a massive, we're at 99% capacity, we're about to exceed, let's fly in this SRE to figure out how to scale something or react to that situation. Again, not saying SREs can't plan ahead, but usually that's how I see a lot of teams use that skill set and that function, is to react and then kind of buy some time and space. But if you're doing that, then you probably haven't spent enough time on the planning, architecture side, or something outside of your original design parameters changed, right? You expected 10,000 something a minute, users a minute, sessions a second, whatever the metric is, and now you're at 100,000, right? And you burst way beyond that planned capacity, even if you had planned for 10 or 20. And so that's where I think they come in together. I think that performance engineer is supposed to be architecting for scale, and that SRE is going to figure out how to implement that and execute on that. But I don't think that typically you're going to see that SRE at that stage of it. You're going to see the biggest value and impact when there's a situation and we need to move quickly to respond to that.
The reason I keep focusing on the need for specialization is because I am seeing more and more articles out there about the burnout rate of SREs, because they turned into glorified level 3 tech support, working in war room situations, which they shouldn't even be in anymore. And then all of a sudden, they're always on call, and they're focused on getting rid of as much toil as they can, but there's a lot of toil they got to handle because automation is their solution for everything. But it's not always a performance issue. And what I'm getting at is I see a report on SREs burning out and then wanting to get out of the field, and then you hear about developers also being asked to handle so much. You build it, you take care of it, your area, you got to know everything, you got to performance test it, you got to security test it, and now we're having developers burn out. So now we've got this topic of platform engineering rising up, where we make this portal and make it easier for the developer experience, which I do believe it, but I think it's because we've asked these new roles to do so much more with so much less. We are just now getting less because they're just overloaded. Do you agree with that? I mean, what's the solution?
Yeah. So I do not have a silver bullet here, but I do think that sustainability and scalability is crucial. And I mean that at a technical level, a people level, a business level, right? The reality is things are changing so fast. We're all kind of making it up as we go. Like, what's the latest problem? How do we overcome it? What is a role? What is a developer? What is even a developer these days, right? And that's a big topic with today versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That definition of developer changes. The definition of tester has changed a lot. And particularly with a lot of the new AI capabilities, right? Is a developer somebody who can ask ChatGPT to generate code, or is a developer have to be somebody who is, making kernel patches and right? Like, where is that line? You're not a real developer. And I think that we sometimes spend a little too much time on the racy version of this versus just and I hate to go back to the Agile Manifesto, people over process, right? What is that team you've put together? What is their mission? And then how do you create that in a sustainable, scalable way so that they can be successful? And whether this is development or some other function in a business, sales, support, right? Everybody is kind of susceptible to burnout. So how do you create your organization to scale and be sustainable and change over time? And I think that's something where a lot of people that I, in my career, I've noticed, whether it's development, whether it's IT, you get a lot of the superhero syndrome, right? We love that hit of coming in there, fixing the problem, whether that's an SRE, whether that's an IT person. We think we have some kind of special knowledge. We feel really special because we've been able to do things that other people find hard. And the reality, though, is you can't do that every day. And
you can't scale a company on superheroes.
You can't, exactly.
It has to be regular heroes, everyday heroes.
Yes, yes. We can all be heroes, but that, flying, Superman didn't really have much of a personal life, right? Yeah. And so, we need that balance. And he burned out too, right?
Yeah.
So, sorry to go too deep on the comics here, but yeah, it's you have to be able to show up every day. And sometimes, we do have to burst, right? There's a big release, there's a big issue. And if we're always running at 110%, we'll never have that capacity to burst up. And so whether your role is tester, developer, SRE, performance engineer, architect, product manager, designer, we want to move fast. That's really important. But I do think we have to play the game out a couple of moves, right? To really make sure that we're there to fight the next day and to make that product be successful.
Good take on that. Okay, back to the topic of DevOps. My understanding is that the whole reason for the existence of DevOps is to break down the silo between development, operations, and testing is in there somewhere, more on the probably left-hand side. But I don't necessarily see that happening really as a whole yet. And I kind of see the same struggles that we saw when Agile became very popular. It went from Agile to Fragile to Water Isle or whatever they call that. And people did a lot of stuff wrong before they then kind of turned the ship around. I kind of see that with DevOps. Do you see that? And if you do, what are some of the most common things where companies are missing it so that they're not getting the true value out of DevOps? Yeah,
I think, people understand the problem they have a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times. They see the new thing, DevOps, DevSecOps, platform engineering, and say, okay, this is going to solve my problem. But a lot of times it's a significant transformation to really move forward. And if it helps you to have a good framework from the outside, because you can all align around that, great. But it comes back to that culture challenge that you're having. And just to kind of peel back the onion a little bit on the DevOps specifically. So most of the time when I see people say, oh yeah, we have our DevOps transformation, we're moving to more DevOps, okay, great. What does that really mean? Well, we put the operations team reporting to the VP of engineering or something, right? We did a little org change. Okay, well that's good first step. But are your operation teams embedded? Are your developers taking call? We were just talking about burnout and how developers are being asked to do more and more. And I think it's more of a, how do you strike that responsibility across the team versus just like, okay, now we add a DevOps person onto the team, we've got a tester, we have an ops person on the team. Great. Well, it's still the single point of failure. It's still this person. If you had that cultural change where the developers are part of that process, do they even understand? And I'm not trying to say that it's beyond their capability, but have they spent any time learning about what it means to operate these production environments, right? Because a lot of times you build that empathy. I talked earlier about having developers be in that support loop. They develop empathy for the customer and the real world application versus kind of what they're seeing in their dev environment. And I think that the closer that you can get the development team to that operational, which is the whole point, right? The more likely you will see the value of that transition, right? And so whether you want to officially say that you're running DevOps or whether or not you just want to say, we need to get better here. How do we get better here? I think the way you get better is by building that empathy, making it part of the team, and you don't have to burn out. You don't have to have every developer be on call in order to achieve that. There's lots of different ways depending on the specific environment. But ultimately, if you just say, we made an org change, it's probably not enough. If you put developers on call, that's probably not enough. I think you have to be pretty committed to this. And the other thing is, do you really need it? Is always a question you should ask, right? Is your product something that is operating 24/7? Do you need 5 nines? What are you what problem are you trying to solve? And if the problem is that the customers are getting lost because they have an issue and it goes to an operations team, and that operation team has a playbook they run, reboot a server, reset a service, allocate more memory, whatever the thing is, and then they do their little task list and then say, we can't figure it out. Now let's escalate it to the on-call engineering. You're not there yet, right? It's how do you, and most important is that feedback loop, right? Okay, what's your after action report? How do you come back and look at, we had this incident, what changes do we make to prevent that in the future? Not just, okay, we added a new line to the playbook of another thing to check. Like that's okay, that's fine. You need to have something, but really where you start to feel like you're practicing in a more DevOps motion is when those changes are saying, how do we prevent that from happening again? How do we think through these different scenarios? This actually ties back to performance engineering. How do we not just look at it from a load perspective, right? Let's send more traffic to it to see what happens, but the different scenarios that we can create, right? Traffic patterns in different regions, burstiness of traffic, right? How do we simulate these different situations that can occur and do these, whether they're tabletop exercises or you're actually finding time when it's kind of a low period or you have a staging environment you can kind of do these live fire drills on. But doing those and making those part of your process is how you're going to actually make those improvements and start acting as a team. That's when I hear DevOps, I think of team and continuous improvement. That's really kind of what I kind of boil it down to.
And I love to hear you say, ask yourself the question, do you really need it? Because dirty little secret, not everybody has to be Google. Not everybody has to be Facebook. There's other ways to get it done. So, okay, last question, and this is the thing that bugs me most. And I want to ask you specifically because you're an executive level here. I cannot think like a CEO. I've tried, I can't, and I'm too far down in the weeds all the time. So I'm just a lowly performance engineer. But I realize how important what I do is. I provide a lot of value. I want the same thing that the executive level wants in their applications. I want things to be fast. I want them to be resilient. I want the lowest cost to your cloud, but most efficient software that you have. I mean, that's ingrained in my job description, really. But I also know that performance is one of 100 things that a CEO has to think about in a day. How do I get performance on the big boy table, on the priority list? That's what's bothering me.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And my simple summary is business impact. right? Literally last week, I was working with my team, and they were excited about something they were doing, and they were talking about the how, right? Oh, we could do this, and it'd be really cool. I'm like, that would be really cool. Why does that matter? How does that really impact the business? For example, hey, if we do this, we could go from 4 nines to 5 nines. Okay, it's going to cost us this much, and we're going to get this benefit. Now, in some environments, spend $1 million, add an extra 9, that's hands down worth the money. Spend $10 million, go the extra 9. Well, the customers aren't expecting that, or SLO is only 3 nines. I can't tell for everybody's own individual business what it looks like, but that's the question, right? You said not everybody has to be Google or Amazon. How much how can you move the business forward? How can you quantify that business impact, and also understanding what your business is trying to do? Let's say your business is trying to grow. You say, hey, we can save $100,000 by doing this. Well, that's fine. We're not really worried about that. We're worried about top line revenue growth. Okay, come in and say, hey, if we spend $1 million, we can get $10 million. Well, okay. Well, right now our goal is to cut costs, and we can't even afford to spend $1 million. Understanding what the executive priority is extremely important for aligning your story with how you can impact the business with what then you tell to that executive suite. So, a lot of times we do all hands, we send out communications about the strategy for the company, and I think people struggle to connect with that. I'm not talking about Tricentis, I'm talking about,
in general, I get it. Yeah. Every company I've ever been to is like that.
Right. Here's a big level we need to do. Like, how do I move the needle there? Understanding what the business drivers are and what is being communicated at that level, and understanding, okay, am I reducing expense? Am I driving revenue? And then and I'll use the word business case, but I think people get overwhelmed by that term. All we're trying to say is, I'm going to do some amount of work. I'm going to bring on a new tool. I'm going to hire a person. I'm going to retrain. There's some expense and cost associated with that. And the more clear you can be about that cost benefit analysis, that I hate to use the word ROI as well, but here's how much we got to spend, time, dollars, whatever, and then here's what we think we're going to get out of that. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think particularly most engineers want to over-engineer the solution and that false precision that occurs, right? It can be back in the envelope swag, right? Roughly what order of magnitude are we talking about from, again, expense or profit side, and what is the business focused on? And trying to tie that back, pressure test it yourself, right? Say, hey, I've got this idea. I think this is the impact. Run that by that last kind of executive session. Try to filter it through the values or the latest update or the all hands, and try to apply it into that and see what happens and comes out of that. I find that process, going through that process, will help you really find what it is that golden message that you're trying to get up, and that's what's critical, is tying your work, your unique strength and perspective. Because look, here's the other secret is that executive staff doesn't have your visibility, and the business will be more successful when you bring both of those views to market, right? That's the successful companies you see that can take that individual performance engineer or developer idea and surface it in a way that moves the business forward and aligns with those business goals. The reality is, a lot of times what you see is, oh, we've got all these good ideas. Why aren't we doing my good idea? Well, we can only do a couple of good ideas, right? And is that aligned with what we think our board is expecting, our shareholders if we're a public company? And so it might look simple and say, hey, I just need a couple of weeks to work on this one thing, or I only need $20,000 to buy this new tool, or whatever the solution is. But putting in that larger context is what helps your manager or your executive kind of bring that in and say, oh, wait a minute, I was talking with Scott, and he told me about this improvement we could make, and that lines up. So you're trying to bring up the right signals up the organization, but also trying to receive the signals coming down.
Right.
And that takes work on both sides, right?
Let me see if I can summarize what you just said in just a couple of sentences. If I can figure out what's keeping the C-level up at night and bothering them the most, and tell a good story with business context of the impact I'm going to make, I've got their attention. That's
exactly.
What you're telling me.
100%. That's much better. And actually, succinctness matters, right? That story needs to be a slide, a page, not, again, and you're seeing it from me, tend to go all the details, all the education. That's fine. You can have an appendix, you can have backup, but what's TLDR it, right? What's the impact? What are the kind of 3 to 5 bullets that really do what you just said? And be succinct there. And then, we want some more information. Okay, we can have a deeper conversation, but exactly what you said. What's keeping the business up at night? What's keeping the business from being successful? How do we provide some solutions for that, and how you TLDR it.
That's awesome. Great answer. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Mav. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mav Turner, for talking with us today on the Performance Tour, and thank you, Tricentis and QA Consultants, for hosting our live event in Austin. Now, we showed you some of the barbecue there, and it was good, thanks to Jebby's food truck for delivering that, but we're not done with the barbecue yet. Roy Reyna, someone I've known for about 20 years, but never had a chance to hang out with, said, when you're in Austin, come to my house, we're gonna have a brisket homemade. Wow, what a compliment that we were given. It was some of the best barbecue I've eaten on this tour. So I want to show you some of the footage of Roy making us this homemade brisket.
It's 5:30 a.m. Scott Moore, James Pulley, and getting the Texas barbecue party started for you already.
Always an exciting time on the Performance Tour. We'll be back next month to deliver another episode about how we make performance a priority for all applications and all systems, and my quest never ends. I'm Scott Moore. I'll see you on the next episode, and we'll see you on the road. Put these on,
All right.
and just look cool.